Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was the nurse on duty when the hospital went dark. I clocked in at 1841, early enough to brief with the day shift charge before she bolted for dry roads. The radar looked like a street artist had smashed a bucket of red and orange across southeast Louisiana. On nights like this, our storm posture binder came out of the cabinet, and everyone had two jobs. The one printed on the badge, and whatever kept people alive when the grid went sideways. I'm a charge nurse on 6 West, mixed med-surg at Bayou Regional Medical Center, a concrete slab of a hospital near Tulane Avenue with a view of the interstate and, on clear nights, the Superdome lights. Our floor handles everything from post-op knees to brittle diabetics to flu cases the clinics can't handle. We are not an ICU, not the ED, not a psych lockdown, but when the city gets stressed, our hallways fill with the spillover from everywhere else. And during storm season, stress is a forecast you can smell. By 1910, my roster looked like a chessboard where someone had lost half the queens. 2 nurses had called out to sandbag their homes in Gentilly. Another was stuck in traffic on I-10 where water pooled fast. I had 4 nurses on the floor and 1 float pulled from PACU. Staffing assigned me 12 direct patients and supervisory oversight on the rest of the unit. The house supervisor radioed, "Expect surge. ED on divert, but family members parking themselves on floors. Keep your doors controlled. Weather watch continues." I handed out assignments with a Sharpie on a whiteboard we keep taped to the medroom wall. Lana, you take 600 and 1608. Felix, 609, 616. Grace, 617, 624. Priya, your rover. IV restarts, Foley complications, pain reassessments. Theo, you're with me for triage and admits. Theo was a new grad in his 3rd month, careful and methodical. I put him at my side because new grads see details the rest of us have learned to skip over. "Checklist," I said, and people called out, "Crash cart sealed and charged. Suction lines clear. Portable O, 2 full. Bedside commode set." It was rote, but the repetition works like a metronome for your nerves. At 19:26, the overhead paging chimed the way it does when someone tests a tone and then hesitates. "Attention all units. Weather advisory. Prepare for code gray procedures." We looked at each other. Code gray here means external air hazard or severe weather. It's the one that makes you look out the window and then check your battery lanterns. I reminded the ward clerk, Dell, to flip the visitor doors to badge only after 20 o'clock. Dell nodded, sipped stale coffee, and patted the bowl of peppermints she sets out for anxious families. Our first 2 admits rolled up from ED at 1943 just as the rain smacked the windows hard enough to rattle the frames. The ED transport tech was pale and sweaty under his hooded rain shell. "Fever and agitation," he said. "They're coming up everywhere. ED is full. We're holding 3 in hallways that should have been discharged hours ago. These 2 are easier to settle on your floor." The first patient's name was on the wristband as Alvarez Renata. She was 38, febrile at 39.9 degrees Celsius, tachycardic at 130 S, cuff showing pressure like a rolling hill, rising, sagging, rising. She had been found in a grocery line downtown, disoriented, with a scratch on her forearm she couldn't explain. The second was a male, mid-50s, surname Gideon, no known allergies, but pupils that tracked the ceiling vents like they had their own gravity. Labs were pending. Imaging was delayed because CT had a flood from a ceiling pan. We settled them, drew blood cultures, and wrote fall precaution on whiteboards above their beds in big letters I never regret. By 20:05, the rain turned static white, the kind that flattens sound. We balanced Tylenol and IV fluids, called respiratory for a tank swap in 620, and adjusted a telemetry lead that kept slipping on sweaty skin. The monitors threw alarms and then settled, the way they do when a body is trying to decide which system to argue with next. Security called my desk at 2014. 6 West, this is security ops. Be advised. NOPD is bringing in 2 detainees with suspected exposure, restrained. Floor assignment requested. ED is maxed. They're coming straight up. Why straight up? I asked, pressing the phone between shoulder and ear while taping a new IV. I could hear wind moan under the door of the stairwell. Elevator priority for law enforcement, the voice said, clipped and polite in that way you get when policy overlaps with weather. They requested mixed med-surg, ETA 5. Prep 622 and 623, I told Theo. Remove sharps from bedside. Restraint kit on standby. Document skin integrity on arrival. Full set of vitals before anything else. He nodded, and I could see the swallow in his throat. They arrived with 2 hospital security officers and 2 NOPD officers, all wet and shining. The detainees wore street clothes damp as dish rags and soft wrist restraints clipped to gurney rails. The one in the lead had the hollow look, jaw set, lips cracked. The second hummed under his breath like a child trying to remember a song. Their intake sheet listed a downtown incident. Altercation at a bus stop. Multiple people bitten or scratched in a crowd when a driver stopped for a fallen sign. A paramedic who did the initial check had written, agitated febrile, poor response to verbal cues. Tetanus up to date per spouse. I signed, took custody, and asked security to clear the hallway of extra bodies. At 2031, the lights flickered, the kind of blink you can shrug off if it only happens once. The ATS in the basement did its automatic flip, and you could feel the entire building exhale as the diesel generator engaged with a low, steady note. We all did the mental math. Fuel reserves, hours, what non-essential loads would cut first. Biomed had told us last winter the generators could keep critical care and life safety circuits powered for 24 to 30 hours if the day tank fed right. Floor lighting would drop to half. Elevators would go to emergency mode. Everyone get your headlamps, I said. Tape your names on them. We do that on nights like this because when it's dark, people move toward light and say your name more calmly if they see it first. Then, 2041. Another flicker, longer this time. Then a shudder like the building was sighing. The lights went, came back, then went again, along with the quiet hum under our feet as the generator tripped. The emergency fixtures caught, but dimly. The nurse servers hummed and died. The in-ceiling air handlers stopped their whisper. The monitor central station in the alcove kept a heartbeat but threw its own warning tone. From the end of the hall, I heard the clunk of an elevator braking and settling. "Elevators down," Dell called, eyes wide. The board over her desk, our bed map, our flow, suddenly felt like a historical document in a museum. "Badge control to locked," I told her. She swiped to command on the security screen. The ward doors clicked. The red exit signs glowed softly on battery. The storm threw its voice at the windows in a rhythmic thumps. This is the point where some people freeze and others move. Nursing is a profession built on the discipline of the next right action. I took a breath and said, "We're going to reorganize. We will use the pediatric wing as our shelter area if needed. It has manual louvered vents, and the playroom can seal. But first we stabilize, triage, strip, now. In storms, the ED handles field triage. But when the ED fills and the stairwells begin to carry families, floors do their own. Priya tore open the plastic on a roll of colored tape. I wrote on index cards with a fat marker: ambulatory, observe, assist, and non-ambulatory, and we taped them above 4 bays we set up on our own floor. We taped numbers on the floor by beds to track evacuations if we had to move. 128 in thick numerals so we could tell at a glance who was where when people started trading rooms. I assigned Felix to families and visitors. You're the diplomat. Keep them calm, keep them together. Offer water from the stash by the ice machine. No one in rooms without permission. I asked Lana to inventory our battery backups. Anything with wheels and a battery gets checked. Portable suction, monitors, the AccuCheck carts. Grace did a sweep for anything that could hurt someone in the dark. Scissors, scalpels, even metal clipboards. At 2058, we heard the first thuds, dull like palms on metal somewhere below us. Everyone went still, listening. Hospitals are built of layers, shafts, ducts, chases. Sound travels like a rumor through the walls. Dell looked at me. I nodded toward the service stairwell. "I'll go," I said, and took Theo because his eyes were steady. We opened the door and felt cooler air fall up the stairwell, if that makes sense. Somewhere below, a gust had found a vulnerability. I clicked my headlamp and played it down the well of stairs. Dust motes free-fell like snow. The sound came again. A heavy tap on something thick and refrigerated. The morgue. On the way down, we passed 5 West, lights down, a nurse staring out a window like there was a movie only she could see. I tapped the glass. She waved me on. On 3, 2 transport stretchers were parked in the hall, abandoned mid-mission. On 1, a family of 5 sat on the landing like they were waiting for a parade to pass. The father held a blanket over the youngest. Basement level smelled like cool stone, disinfectant, and diesel sweetness. The morgue door was propped academic style with a rolled towel. A bad sign. We closed that door religiously. The office window, wire mesh glass, showed a glow from a plugged-in desk lamp on battery. The thudding sounded farther down, beyond where the drawer banks were. I knocked my knuckles on the frame. "Housekeeping?" I called softly, out of habit. "Facilities, it's 6 West." No answer. Theo's lamp found a toe tag on the floor. Then another. The stainless steel drawer bank, the one with the numbered plaques, had a drawer open an inch, no internal light to show anything within, just the faint glimmer of empty space. The sound came again, thunk, heavier this time, like a weight resettling. I remembered the ED sending down an unidentified earlier, found on Canal Street. I also remembered security's report of restraints, of agitation. You learn to knit those threads even if you wish you hadn't. "We're not opening anything," I said, and the firmness in my voice helped me hear it myself. "We are leaving, and we are calling security to secure this level." Back upstairs, the building felt tighter. News trickled from phones while they had juice. Social feeds said the power outages were patchy across the quarter, that there had been some sort of violent episode at a parade staging area. Multiple people suddenly getting sick, collapsing, then lashing out. Words like rabies and foodborne and drugs bubbled in the same stew. We'd seen those stories before, most evaporate by morning, but the storm kept the stew on simmer. At 2116, the automatic medication cabinets on our floor chirped and died. Pyxis, Omnicell, names branded in plastic, are only as useful as the power lines feeding them. "Manual override," I told Grace, and her eyes said she'd hoped I wouldn't say it. The floor stock is enough for a night, sometimes 2, but controlled meds live behind metal shutters in pharmacy. We could wait and ration, but agitation had already turned 2 rooms into wrestling matches and 1 bed into a barricade. If you work med-surg, you know the difference between confused and dangerous. Confused needs a quiet room and a hand you can hold. Dangerous needs secure restraint and medications that de-escalate a nervous system on fire. We could get those meds two ways: wait for facilities to bring up a key, if we could reach them, or go to pharmacy ourselves. I called the house supervisor on my radio. It squawked and crackled. "Pharmacy," I said. "We need access." Her voice came back thinner. "Shutters are down. I don't have a key. The interior latch can be popped with a ceiling access if you know where to look." I looked at Theo, and he looked at me. "I fit in drop ceilings," he said. Grim humor pushed through clenched teeth. "Hold that thought," I told him. "We'll do it later. We're not leaving the floor right now." At 2129, the stairwells began to fill. Families seeking higher floors in storms is a tradition you can't break. We got a wave of people who had parked in the garage, then abandoned their cars when the garage alarm sounded. A transport team returning to 7 West stopped on our landing, breathless, with a patient on a gurney whose IV had pulled. We caught the line and smoothed the chaos. It felt like catching dishes falling off a shelf. Priya and Felix shepherded families into our lounge, where we pushed 2 couches together into a corral and put on a movie downloaded onto a tablet, because sometimes the difference between panic and patience is a cartoon's background music. The 2 detainees, now patients, grew more agitated, then abruptly still, the way the air feels before a thunderclap. Lana went to check Gideon's vitals. He stared past her at the wall like the paint had secrets. Renata Alvarez had pulled her knees up and was whispering a word I couldn't catch. I had Priya sit with her and hold her wrist to feel the pulse, a trick from an old ICU nurse that tells you more than a number. At 2147, the building groaned again and the generator coughed back to life. Someone in facilities had earned a medal we'd never get to pin. The lights climbed from twilight to dim morning. The elevator panel in the hall beeped and flashed emergency mode, with a single car responding to fire service controls. It was something. We used it to send 2 of our most stable patients down 1 floor to radiology because a resident insisted. Then we lost it again at 2155 when a wind gust hit like a train. The elevators braked with an unhappy clunk. We made a group decision: no more elevators tonight. Manual everything. "Ward doors stay locked," I told Dell. "Visitors stay in the lounge, no exceptions unless we escort." Dell, who has 3 nephews and a spine of steel, nodded and turned the peppermint bowl so the cheery side faced out again. At 2202, I pulled my floor into a huddle. "Listen, we are pivoting to controlled evacuation to pediatrics if the generator won't stabilize. Peds has manual window vents, and the old playroom can be sealed as a safe room. There's a window washer track that runs past those windows. If the ambulance bay's roof remains intact, we can use the track as a guide to get outside and across, or at least a stage. But we only move with intention. Here's the plan." I sketched on the whiteboard: 6 west to 6 east via the connector hall, then drop down the short flight of stairs to PEDS on 5. Our PEDS wing is 1 level down. Meanwhile, we'd keep a home base here. The nurses' station would remain the radio and message hub. We'd move ambulatory patients first in small groups with a nurse and a tech. Then those who needed assistance. Non-ambulatory last, with stretchers and as many strong backs as had the muscles for it. We'd use pillowcases tied at the ankles and soft belts across chests for those who dislodged when scared. "Assignments," I said again. "Theo, you're with me for pharmacy when we make the run. Priya, you and Felix are triage captains. Lana, you lead ambulatory evac. Grace, you're incident scribe, track names, bands, room numbers, destination. Dell, you're our quartermaster. Water, blankets, wipes, the glow sticks. Anyone comes asking for supplies who isn't part of our group, You log it and give them a measured amount, no exceptions. I took a roll of white medical tape and nicked strips with my teeth. Bad habit I regret every time. And wrote 6W evac 6E/5 peds on them. We put the strips on our scrub chests. I wrote the same on my headlamp strap. People take orders better when the person giving them is clearly identified. It sounds bureaucratic. It's actually kindness. At 22:18, the thudding from below returned, closer, and something metal rattled in the service shaft that runs behind our floor's supply closet. The same shaft that touches the morgue. We all heard it. I looked at the closet door. The vent slats made a low whistle. Inside, the dark sounded like it was listening to us. We got moving. If fear is a liquid, motion is the drain. Ambulatory patients first. Those who could walk with assistance and a walker. We taped their names on their sleeves with their room numbers, because if you've ever seen the aftermath of a fast movement of people in a hospital, you know how quickly room numbers become more myth than map. Felix went ahead with a flashlight. Lana followed with 2 people draped over her forearms, gentle and firm. Priya checked each door we passed to make sure no one would sweep into a room and lock themselves in. At 22:31, as we moved our second group, an elevator down the hall chimed. The doors didn't open. The chime sounded again, a patience game. I walked to it and pressed the call button. The panel flashed lockout. Then a heavy bang came from inside the car, like someone striking the door with a flat hand. We all stepped back instinctively. "Move," I said softly, and shepherded the small group down the hall with my body like a sheepdog. Back in 6 West, the nurse station hummed with the subdued chaos of a kitchen in a storm. The detainees in 622 and 623 stilled and stiffened in their beds, chests rising in shallow climbs, then settling in a rhythm that didn't match the cardiac monitors. Renata murmured and tensed her jaw. Gideon's eyelids fluttered with a focus that made my skin go tight. I called security ops again, no answer this time. We made the pharmacy run at 22:44 because every 10 minutes we waited, I could feel the baseline agitation on the floor rise 1 notch. The pharmacy sits in a cross hall on 3, behind a metal crash shutter that came down when power failed. The interior latch is reachable by dropping a ceiling tile in the adjacent storage room and crawling over the wall. It's campus scuttle, but facilities taught it during last year's storm drill. It isn't pretty, it's necessary. I left Grace as acting charge on the floor and took Theo, who is slim with a rock climber's balance. We took the stairs with headlamps, keeping to the wall. At 5, we heard voices in the stairwell. A family singing softly, staying together, then stepped around them with murmured apologies. At 3, the air felt damp. The pharmacy hallway was lit by the glow of a single battery lantern the pharmacist had propped there before she left at 21 o'clock. The metal shutter looked like a closed eyelid. We ducked into the adjacent storage room. The drop ceiling tiles were the fibrous kind that disintegrate if you look at them wrong. I pushed one up. Theo slid onto the shelf and then lifted himself into the crawl space, which was a web of beams and dust. "See it?" I whispered. He clicked his headlamp off and on so I could track him. 2 minutes later, he grunted softly, the sound of a hand finding a latch. A moment after that, the crash shutter popped its lock with a gentle, blessed clack. Inside pharmacy, the dark felt deliberate. Shelves with labels, the smell of antiseptic and cardboard. We didn't take everything. We took what we needed to lower everyone's temperature and slow the adrenaline storms. Antipyretics, a few standard sedatives, some antipsychotics that in low, careful doses can dial down dangerous agitation. We grabbed IV fluids, saline flushes, replacement bags for an infusion that had stalled upstairs. We left a note with the date, time, names, and what we took. Documentation is a lifeline you toss your future self. Back on 6 West at 2308, we administered with caution, one patient at a time, documented by hand in a binder, witnessed by 2, doses small. The change across the floor told me we'd found our timing. The patient in 612 stopped pulling at his oxygen cannula and started tracking conversations. The woman in 605 unclenched her fists long enough to drink water. The detainees in 622 and 623 didn't relax. They went very still. Their EKG tracings flattened into a steady midline with little variation, which is not what we expected, but also not what I had a name for at the time. The stairwells filled. Families held babies in backpacks. Transport stretchers, those long, rattling carriages, began to queue in the corridor, facing nowhere. Someone knocked on the ward doors and shouted for help, and we told Dell to ask their name and need through the glass, then to let them in one at a time. One of them was a volunteer from the university across the street, a second-year engineering student named Emir, who had been delivering bottled water to floors for the last hour. He was taller than the carts he pushed and had the calm manner I associate with people who fix things for fun. I pressed him into service. "Come," I said, "we're going to rig a pathway." The pediatric wing at Bayou Regional is a half-flip down from 6 West. The thing that makes it gold in a blackout is that it's old. Old buildings have operable windows, manual louvers you can crank with a lever. The playroom, added in the 1980s, has a heavy door and a strip of weather seal someone cared to install. If you throw a wheeled crash cart sideways in that doorway and tape the seams with plastic drape, you can make a decent seal. There's a window washer track that runs past 2 of those windows because in this older section the building line sets back and maintenance crews used to hang cradles there. I knew that from an evacuation drill years ago when we all swore we'd never need that trick. Here we were. At 2326 we began to move in earnest. I led the first ambulatory group down to PEDS with Amir because he could carry 2 oxygen tanks like a waiter with trays. We cranked open the louvers a hair to let crossbreeze in without letting the storm in. We rolled mats onto the floor with numbers taped on them so our bed numbering system would follow us wherever we went. We set a whiteboard against the playroom wall and wrote, "Names, room, current location" in big block letters. Grace would update it from 6 West. Dell would copy it to a second board up there. If you ever manage a controlled evacuation, build redundancy into your note-making like your life depends on it, because sometimes it does. Back on 6 West at 2341, I heard a sound that made time slow down. A drawer slide from metal rails, then a soft metallic knock as if testing how far it could go. It came from the supply closet, the one with the vent that had begun to whistle. Theo's face went a shade paler. He and Amir stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway while I twisted the privacy sign on the door to closed, which is funny if you consider it, as if a sign matters to the kind of person who ignores doors. But sometimes ritual matters. Sometimes it tells your hands what to do while your mind catches up. Then the first elevator's fire bell rang. Not the alarm, the bell you hear when someone uses a key to call the car. The doors on the far bank slid open 3 inches, stopped, then tried again. Something pressed from the inside. A hand? No, it was too flat. A gurney frame, I realized. The car was full, and something inside pressed against the doors when the car tried to answer the call. Whatever was inside the elevator was exactly what the elevator had trapped and why the elevator would not open. "We move," I said. "No one stands by an elevator. Stay away from the doors." By 07, we had half our ambulatory patients staged in pediatrics with numbers taped to mats, water distribution controlled, and the playroom half sealed as our safe room. The atmosphere shifted as people realized the room had a plan. Plans change the air like oxygen. At 0:19, as we prepared to bring the assisted group down, Lon A radioed, 622, restraints loosened. Patient repositioned himself. He's at the side rail. Her voice tried to decide between clinical and confused. On my way, I said, and sprinted down the hall with Theo and Priya behind me. Gideon, mid-50s, detainee, wristband glinting, stood at the side of his bed with the soft wrist restraint still looped around his wrist like a bracelet. He stared at the doorframe, not at us, and his breathing had that shallow, regular quality I'd seen earlier. He didn't blink when I said his name. His pupils were round and dark, and held more steady than the fluorescent flicker should have allowed. There was a tear at the cuff of his sleeve. No blood. No obvious injuries beyond the scratch noted on intake. Mr. Gideon, I'm Claire, I said, gentle but firm. We're going to sit together and have some water. He moved his head toward me as if testing the mechanics of the motion rather than attempting to look. Priya stood a step behind me with the portable O2 and a mask in case his saturations dipped. Theo had a soft belt ready. We approached like you approach a skittish dog. Side on, no sudden moves, one hand out. He didn't flinch, he didn't grasp. He just leaned. A minor shift of weight toward us like gravity had changed. From 623 we heard a bed frame squeak. Renata exhaled a long, slow breath and sat up without using her arms. People do not sit up that way. People use their hands. But she moved as if her center of gravity had decided to take a tour and the rest of her went along. I filed the observation away because naming it felt like waking a dream you didn't want to finish. Sedation, I said softly to Priya. Low, gentle. Priya nodded and drew up a dose we'd agreed on earlier to take the edge off dangerous rolling storms of agitation. We do not sedate to knock people out. We sedate to give a nervous system a chance to reset. We administered. We waited. It had an effect on their muscle tone, but not the one I'd expect. They softened in the limbs, but held a remarkable posture in the spine. It was as if a wire ran from ear to heel, and someone had tuned it to a note I didn't know. Outside, the storm pressed its palms to the windows and held them there. The stairwells grew noisier. From below, a noise like metal complaining rose. Service shaft, elevator car, morgue drawers, something that had been built to hold on now being asked to do more than its designers had intended. At 0:42, a call came over the hospital radio frequency we share with security. Be advised, a voice said, crisp and tight. B1 levels reporting structural breach in morgue corridor. Recommend floors above restrict access to service shafts. Repeat, restrict access. There was a pause, and the radio became the quietest thing in the room. I asked Dell to pull the paper maps from the firebox, the ones facilities keeps with every lifeline marked. We laid them out like war plans and traced alternate paths to pediatrics that didn't pass near the service chase. We rerouted our assisted group down the far stairwell, the one that smells like cleanser and has the band poster of the concert series from years ago taped under the rail. Amir went first with a lantern. Felix closed the group like a shepherd. Lana stood mid-line, taking elbows and steadying knees. On our third trip, 110, power surged enough to trigger the fire doors to reset and then relock. The air handlers coughed and gave us one lungful of cool air, which everyone in the hall inhaled at once the way you do when relief advertises itself in the room. Then the lights dimmed again. People's shoulders dropped as if they'd been told a joke that wasn't quite funny. We kept moving. In pediatrics at 127, we sealed the playroom door with the drape and tape, leaving a hand-sized gap at eye level so we could see out without inviting the storm in. The room had murals of fish and clouds. The art looked odd in the headlamp glare. We set up a command corner, whiteboard, radio, a ring of sticky notes with names and allergies. A volunteer parent we'd recruited, Hannah, a schoolteacher with the voice of a coach, read off names as Grace texted updates when her phone caught a signal. The adhesive and the tape strips warmed under fingers and stuck well. Small wins matter. We celebrated each one with a nod. I left Priya in Peds and took Theo and Amir back to 6 West for the non-ambulatory. This was the hard work. We used the transport stretchers queued in our hall, moved 2 at a time, and kept the route clear. We used the window washer track as a psychological anchor. It shone under our headlamps like a line someone had drawn with a ruler against chaos. The plan to cross to the ambulance bay roof via the track was a contingency, not a first choice. But plans like that act like gravity. You stick to them until you don't, and then you jump. On our second non-ambulatory run, 158, the elevator bell chimed again. This time, the door on the far bank slid open 3 inches, then another 3, then stuck. A gurney wheel tipped into the gap. A hand gripped the door seam, fingers flat, and then pressed again with a force that made the metal whine. We froze. The hand slid away. The wheel retracted. The door closed with a thud, like the car had decided to keep its secrets. I looked at Amir. His eyes were steady, his breath measured, but sweat lit his brow. "We're okay," he said, quiet. "We're okay." Back in 6 West, 622 and 623 stood empty. We stopped moving. Then we scanned. Beds stripped back. Restraint loops hanging slack. The monitors blinked, still tracing lines from leads attached to a patient who had left the bed without removing them. EKG leads sometimes hold by habit. They'd pulled free and lay like commas on the sheets. "Lockdown," I said softly. "Swing the ward doors to secure." Dell's hand went to the maglock switch. Doors clicked in a way that tells your bones they're doing something about a threat you can't yet see. We searched 6 West with our headlamps, calling names we knew might not be answered. We moved in pairs and avoided the service closet. The supply alcove where we keep the linen had a new fold of shadow. The staff bathroom had a door ajar by an inch that it hadn't had before. The medication room showed a drawer slightly out, as if someone had begun to open it and then forgot why. We saw movement on the far end, the kind of motion you catch and then lose when your light swings. I signaled with my fingers, hold, left, right, and Theo and Amir moved like we'd trained for drills they'd never wanted. A figure stepped out of 618 with a slow, certain gait. Renata. Her head turned as if tracking a sound we couldn't hear. Her wrists were free, her expression neutral, peaceful even. Without the jolt of panic I might have felt, I recognized the posture as the same we'd seen earlier. A central wire tuned tight, holding her. "Renata," I said, calm. "You're with us. We're going to walk together." She didn't startle. She didn't smile. She leaned a fraction toward us, then pivoted. A slow, mechanical foot shift toward the stairwell. Not the one to Peds, the service stairwell. I stepped to block the hall, and she paused. Her eyes didn't search mine. They fixed past me, on nothing I could see, and then she adjusted her angle to move to the main stairwell, the one we wanted. I stepped aside and, more intrigued than afraid, matched her pace for 2 steps. Her breath sounded like a radio between stations. Then she turned the corner and took the stairs down one at a time, hand sliding along the rail not to hold but to orient. Theo and Amir flanked me, and we shadowed her 2 steps back, not touching. We reached Pediatric's landing, but she didn't stop. She moved along the corridor past the murals, past the playroom door, toward the window washer track. She put a hand gently on the frame, then lifted a finger as if testing air for vibration. And then she stopped and stood, listening. It occurred to me that whatever had changed in her wasn't just in her muscles. It was in her senses. People's sensoriums shift with fever, with fear, with medicines. But this felt like a radio picking up a station I didn't know we had. I wanted to catalog it, to name it, because that's how I make sense of things that frighten me without showing it. Then a new sound entered the corridor. A soft, distant whoop whoop whoop, the kind that makes emergency departments tilt their heads and check the sky. Helicopter. I checked my watch, 2:14. The storm had lost some teeth. The wind still scoured, but the rain eased just enough to turn from roar to rush. Through the louvers, a stripe of night looked a hair lighter. The helipad at Bayou Regional sits on the far corner, a flat square of certainty in a skyline of pipes. We all held our breath because sometimes sound breaks you and sometimes it saves you. Life flight, Emir murmured. He'd done a maintenance internship at a campus that shares a pad. That's a life flight rotor. We reached the playroom door and looked out the eye-level gap. Across the way, the helipad's edge glowed a dull, battery-backed safety line. A helicopter approached, red light blinking, nose canted slightly, the rotor wash scattering rain like birds. It wasn't steady. It drifted, as if the pilot's hand had left the stick a moment too long. It yawed, corrected, yawed again. You learn, working in a hospital, the body language of machines. This one looked like it needed a hand it didn't have. I switched my radio to the frequency we use to coordinate pad arrivals. Bayou Regional Receiving. Life flight. This is 6 West charge. Do you copy? Static, then a broken. Copy, APRO, fuel, auto, and the signal died. The helicopter drifted left and corrected with a lazy wobble. The rotor thumped like a heart with a murmur. It passed the window washer track, and for a second I had the insane thought of throwing a line. Ridiculous. But desperate brains consider desperate interventions like costume changes. Signal or stay hidden? Theo asked, distilling the 1,000 thoughts in the corridor to one choice. We'd planned to stay dark. Light invites attention, and attention had been a mixed gift all night. But we also lived in a building full of people whose best chance was someone landing where landing was designed to happen. The pilot might be there and disoriented. Or the machine could be running on automation and hoping the GPS remembered us. Either way, pads are letters written to the sky. Land here. If we stayed dark, we were unreading our own name. Signal, I said. And in that decision, a chain of actions fired like a sequence you knock down with a fingertip. Dell, turn on the pad beacon if you can access the switch, I said into the radio, though I knew its power might be on another grid we didn't control. If not, we improvise. Pediatrics had emergency lanterns, and the small, blessed light sticks we keep for children afraid of the dark. We cracked a dozen and lined them at the window so their greenish glow drew a soft rail line. Emir unscrewed a fixture cover and angled the reflective coat toward the window. Theo took a flashlight and used his hand in a methodical pattern. SOS is 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, and I realized I hadn't seen him do that before, but he was doing it now, like muscle memory he borrowed from a book. The helicopter adjusted, yawed toward us, then overshot, then came back, rotor wash pushing rain like sheets. It approached the pad not like a clean drop, but like a leaf you try to catch by guessing where it will be in 3 seconds. Everyone inside the playroom, away from the windows, I said. Crash cart against the door. We brace if the wash hits. We staged as if this had been a drill, because in some sense it always had been in pieces. The helicopter drifted across the pad's edge. Its skid clipped the yellow stripe and slid a foot. The fuselage rocked. The rotor whumped slower, then caught, then whumped again. Through the mist, I saw the cockpit lit by ghost light, and no silhouette in the pilot's seat. An empty set of belts. A headset tilting against the headrest like a hand had just left it. Automation, Emir said softly. Or a return to pad mode. It banked slightly and settled in a skewed kiss on the pad, half on, half off, stabilizing. The rotor kept turning, slower. The craft didn't power down in a clean way. It limped into a pause, as if asking for a human to finish the sequence. It didn't get one. The immediate question changed from signal or hide to approach or hold. Helicopters on pads are not just machines. They are wind, noise, heat, and risk. But on nights like this, they are also possibility. "Stay," I told the group. "We assess." I took Theo and Amir to the playroom door and peeked through the gap again. The rotor slowed one more notch. The rain eased to a mist. Dawn was not yet here, but the sky in the east had the thinnest lift to it, like someone had pulled the blackout shade up an inch. Down the hall, a whisper of motion. Soft footfalls, a body brushing a wall. We turned and saw Gideon at the corner, posture neat, eyes serene, listening toward the pad as if the machine's heartbeat called him. He moved like a compass needle lining up. Then, the strangest thing, he turned his head toward me, not focusing, but pausing as if some part of him recognized some part of me. He lifted his hand an inch as if to wave, then let it fall like he'd remembered mid-motion, he didn't know how. "Mr. Gideon," I said softly, "stay with us." He didn't step forward. He also didn't step back. He simply waited. We had to make the next call. Approach the helicopter meant traversing the trackside of the building or cross through the clinical hallway to the stair that leads to the roof. The roof access is badge-controlled, but in a blackout the panic bar can be overridden if facilities has toggled the right switch. We didn't know if that switch had been toggled. We could test it. We also had patients gathering like bees around a queen, drawn by sound they weren't choosing. "Plan," I said to my crew, and they already knew the rhythm by now. I take 2 to the roof door to test access. If it opens and the pad is stable, we stage a controlled crossing of our most critical first. Those who require oxygen beyond what tanks can carry, and those who can receive safe transport. We do not rush the rotor. We do not send anyone near a turning blade. If the craft goes unstable, we retreat. Theo and Amir would come with me. Priya would hold pediatrics. Lana would bring the next group to the staging line. Grace would keep the ledger. Dell would watch the cameras and tell us if the stairwell filled. It was a plan the way a raft is a plan. Buoyant enough if you keep your weight right. We moved. The corridor to the roof access door smelled like rain and the faint oil of machinery. The door was metal with a push bar and a sign that had been updated a dozen times. Authorized personnel only. Alarm will sound. Emergency exit. I pushed, ready for the scream of an alarm that would set nerves alight. It opened with a complaint like a sigh. Wind slid along the roof like a hand smoothing a sheet. The helipad glowed faint and noble in the mist. The helicopter sat on it like a tired hawk. The rotor almost stilled. The nose canted right. The medical compartment door was closed. The pilot's seat empty. We crossed the threshold carefully, keeping low, headlamps off to not blind ourselves in reflected mist. We reached the edge of the pad. The paint underfoot felt slick. The friction compound held better than I feared. I looked into the cockpit. No pilot. The instrument panel blinked idiot lights like a Christmas tree that had lost its instructions. The collective rested low. The cyclic tilted as if a hand had left it there, which it must have. But by whom and when? "Fuel?" Emir asked. The gauge showed a polite quarter, enough for a flight that had ended here. The radio squelched and died when I pressed the transmit. We stood for 3 breaths and let the facts settle. A helicopter is here, apparently manageable, apparently alone. It is a tool if we understand it, and a hazard if we pretend to. We retreated to pediatrics. I laid out the options to the group in 2 sentences that felt like I had practiced them in a mirror. We have a craft on the pad that might take people out. We also have a craft on the pad that might invite attention we don't want. We're going to move as if both are true. We created a signal team and a transport team. Signal team would stack glow sticks in an arrow we could flip to no if we changed our minds. A trick I'd learned from a trauma nurse who had done tornado duty in Oklahoma. Transport team would ready 2 of our most fragile. Mrs. Flanders from 512, whose oxygen needed had crept up to the point where tanks would be a variable we couldn't manage much longer, and baby Collins, who had been in PEDS for RSV observation and whose parents had joined our ad hoc staff by making everyone hold still with a smile and a joke. The sight of a baby sleeping through a storm changes how people breathe. At 3:12, we opened the roof door again and felt the wind step toward us like a curious dog. The sky east was definitely brighter. The rain had thinned to a lace curtain. We led the small group onto the roof along the painted walkway. The chopper glinted with a wet sheen. We reached the skids. Theo, who reads manuals for fun, found the door latch and slid it open. Inside smelled like plastic and faint sweat. The stretcher clamps waited. The overhead panel showed a line of switches. We would not take off. That was fantasy. But we could shelter in the craft, stage oxygen out of the wind, or, if a pilot emerged from some other part of the building, be ready. Sometimes being ready is a miracle. We placed Mrs. Flanders in the medical bay and secured the portable O2. We placed baby Collins's bassinet on the floor and strapped it with 2 belts like a universe in a rectangle. We closed the door against the wind. We stood back, headlamps off, eyes on the horizon and on the windows to our left, where our people watched us like characters in a book they weren't sure how to end. Behind us, a soft sound of footfalls. We turned. Gideon stood at the pad's edge, posture straight, chin level, eyes soft. He took 1 step toward the helicopter. I stepped between and raised a hand, not to push, but to make a wall of air he might choose not to cross. He paused. He tilted his head, listening, then turned it the slightest degree toward the sunrise that wasn't there yet, but was on its way. In that moment, I understood he wasn't trying to get to the craft. He was aligning with something we couldn't hear. It made no sense. It also made perfect sense in the logic of a night where drawers wrapped in the dark and elevators knocked back. "Stay with us," I said, and because words are also tools, I repeated it like a metronome. "Stay with us. Stay with us." Sometimes the simplest script is the strongest rope. Inside pediatrics, the playroom, a sealed boat in a blowing sea, held the rest of our staged group. Priya had fashioned a dry erase welcome sign that someone had illustrated with a fish wearing a nurse cap. Dell had found a battery speaker and set it to play soft white noise that matched the storm and made its own version of calm. Grace had a ledger that could have been mistaken for a family Bible. Felix had chairs in a circle and was leading people in a call and response of the plan so that the plan, too, could be a song. We held. We breathed. We counted. The rotor stopped. The sky went from graphite to that first charcoal smudge of dawn. The storm's voice dropped 1 register. At 4:10, the hospital's generator caught again and held like a note sung by a choir that finally found its pitch. The lights lifted. The elevator panels did not. The badge readers winked but offered no sympathy. The radio picked up a transmission from the house supervisor. "Hold your positions. EMS units are staging at the ramp off 2 lane. Roads are partial. Helicopter on pad confirmed not occupied by pilot. We are requesting guidance from Life Flight Base. You're doing great, team. You're doing great. 2 words you don't often get at 410 that can hold a person in one piece. We used the pad as our forward staging. Oxygen, shelter from wind. A symbol that said air. We used pediatrics as our safe space. Air you can breathe without tasting metal. A door that responded to a push like it was built to comply. We used 6 West as our outpost. A place to check what you want to leave and what you must. At 5:02, the first real light of morning touched the helipad's corner. It was small. It was enough to turn the wet metal from gray to something like color. The Life Flight helicopter sat like a patient. I stood at the playroom door's gap and looked down the corridor toward the main stairwell. At the far end, the elevator doors were closed now. Quiet. The supply closet vent no longer whistled. In that early light, everything looked like itself again, the kind of trick dawn plays when you've been awake all night. But I knew better. Things had changed. A line had been crossed between what the body will do and what the mind can explain. We had been there to see it and to keep people in one piece while it happened. We faced our final beat, the one our plan had called Signal or Hide, which had turned into a series of calls. Choose a safe room, send someone through the ceiling tiles, reinforce a door, light an arrow, open a roof. Now, a new choice presented itself with the clarity of day. We could wave our arms at the sky and trust that whoever answered would bring help, or we could wait in our sealed room with our names written down and our oxygen steady, trusting that the plan that had brought us this far would carry us a few steps more. I looked at my crew. Theo, careful and methodical, eyes clearer than when the night began. Priya, calm as a field, hands that had learned new knots. Lana, tuck-in blanket queen turned unit mover. Grace, scribe and anchor. Felix, diplomat and shepherd. Dal, quartermaster and doorman of a world the size of a corridor. Amir, a student volunteer turned infrastructure. The families who had become staff by deciding to be the people in the room not waiting to be rescued. And the patients. Mrs. Flanders breathing evenly in a helicopter that might lift today or might not. Baby Collins sleeping through a lesson in contingency planning. And Gideon, who stood at the pad's edge like a sundial at dawn, measuring something we did not name. Signal, I said again, now to the morning. Not because I was sure what would arrive if we did, but because that is what hospitals do. They signal, they say, there are people here, and we are keeping them together, and if you come, we will meet you halfway across the roof with a stretcher, with a ledger, with a plan. We cracked the last of the glow sticks and laid them in an arrow pointing to the pad. Theo flashed the SOS one more time, this time a little brighter because the batteries liked the warm. Amir angled the reflective fixture just so. Priya stepped to the playroom gap and lifted her hand, a small wave that looked like a mother quietly hailing a taxi without waking her sleeping child. And I stood where I could see both the sky and the ledger, and said the words that have carried me through every night shift of my life. We're here. The morning answered with a sound you don't mistake once you've heard it, a rotor far off. Steadier this time, without the wobble of a craft flying itself home. It grew louder, and the pad's stripe seemed to glow from the inside. Someone had found our name in the sky. We had written it clearly enough. We braced the door, measured our breaths, and prepared to do in daylight what we had already done in the dark. Move people with intention, record their names, hold their hands, keep their air moving. The helicopter approached in a clean line, and for a second I thought I saw the silhouette of a pilot's head. Whether I did or didn't, whether the craft would land or hover or circle for a better approach, whether the roads below opened like veins or stayed clogged like a bad day, we had made ourselves findable. Behind me, Gideon turned his head the tiniest fraction, as if a signal had moved through him and on, as if a wave had passed and left him standing. He lowered his chin. He stayed. And on a roof that smelled like rain and machine oil and the first hesitant sun of a new day, I felt the kind of quiet that comes not when a danger ends, but when a group decides that their plan will hold one step more. We lifted our hands to the new shadow on the pad, and all the separate noises of a hospital, the beeps and murmurs and hushes, shifted into one steady tone I knew by heart. It was the sound of people in uncertain light, choosing to be the kind of noise that helps. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.